this guy in my life, Cupertino, 33 years. And I have a BS degree in planning, master's in public administration, 43 years of government experience, and I've been on commissions for about 14 years in the city. So I know the city very well, currently a planning commissioner. So I feel I'm qualified for this position, but I welcome your questions and discussion.
Great. All right, I'll start. There's 1,000 pounds of gorilla in our city, as begins with a V. I'll go. How would you engage the public to find a specific plan and development agreement that they would support if the property owner would also support it? I mean, I don't think the charrette process was the right mechanism to do this.
Yeah.
So what would you come up with?
Well, we learned in grad school, sometimes it takes 90 meetings. I think we've exceeded that with Valco already. But I think we need more meetings, and I think we need them next to Valco in the neighborhoods. I was talking to someone who did a precinct analysis, and a lot of the votes were around Valco. A lot of concerns right around Valco. So I think especially Rancho Recanado, East Cupertino, the area around Valco, we need to meet with people, possibly in their homes or in some local school facility, where they feel like they don't have to come to sort of the government's turf in City Hall, where they can feel more at home. And again, just listen, get their thoughts. There are a lot of thoughts. It's very complicated. But I do want to say one thing, and that is that, I had obviously some votes in the Planning Commission. I was quoted on a flyer. You all know that. But I work for you as a planning commissioner. I understand you have views, and I'm willing to support you in your views. And that, I think, is the role of the Planning Commission. It's not to be antagonistic toward the council or bring personal advocacy to the commission, but is to work for the council as you listen to the community. So to the extent that I can help you listen, I'll be glad to do that.
Okay, Yvonne.
Okay. So it's more important nowadays to have objective standards in our city code and general plan. Where do you see that we can improve on our standards?
I'm a big fan of trees. And it may sound funny, but I'm on the board of a tree planting group that really fosters urban forestry. And trees are one aspect of the city that most people support. And it brings a lot of benefit to the city. So I would like to see us be known as like a tree-lined city. That's one thing. The other thing is objective standards are something the community needs to determine with regard to height, setback, design. It's hard sometimes as a commissioner, you see these designs, and I think personally they're ugly, but I'm not going to impose my personal taste on a development that seems to be workable and profitable and real. So again, that's, and council, you can help determine that as well, but I'm here to support you.
Where and what type of growth should be encouraged and discouraged in our city?
Okay, well that's again the big question. I think a big opportunity for growth is accessory dwelling units. I know that the Housing Commission is looking at eliminating the $15,000 park fee for getting a permit to build one. And I think that can help. Again, there are going to be issues with the traffic, parking, but if we can work on creative transportation solutions, I think the ideal thing would be, say, a teacher lives in an accessory dwelling unit, pays low rent, and a bicycle to work, that kind of thing. Another opportunity is development along the urban core, Stevens Street Boulevard. Our consultant last summer showed that you can have higher density buildings that don't look tall and bulky. Part of that is smaller units, and I think people are willing to accept smaller units in some cases.
Okay, thanks. John?
So the commission is in between the developers and the city council. And so looking at what the developer proposes and vetting it, what is the criteria that you use that you would say, no, this would not be able to go through versus this would? What's the criteria that you're using?
You know, a lot of times it's how it fits in with the local community. We had a situation last year where a developer proposed more lots than the local neighbors were originally expecting. And the developer is going to cut down a heritage tree and build on what was an unstable lot. This came to you on the council. And so in that case, I worked with the commission to reject the developer's proposal because of the inconsiderateness that the developer treated the residents. And it was also something I didn't think was workable for the site. In other cases, I think you have to look at what is good for the city. You know, city has certain needs. We obviously need housing. We need some hotel units. But obviously there's an interest in not having real high-rise buildings, interest in not having a lot of development. So again, I think developers are aware of that. If we have objective standards that the developer knows about ahead of time, my role is not to tell the developer what to do, but to help them understand the city process and the city standards, so they can hopefully build something that doesn't get mired in a lot of back and forth controversy.
So, can you elaborate on that last statement, how you feel your role is to help the developer?
Yeah,
do
yeah.
what?
You know, I will sometimes express my opinion to the developer, but I'll say this is just my opinion, and I think it looks ugly, you know, something like that. But I'll say that's my personal opinion. But I will help the developer look at how it might fit in with the city's transportation issues. You know, some developments right near work where they could walk to work. Hamptons is an example. So I might favor development that would help reduce traffic by letting people live close to work. But again, each situation is different.
That's time.
You know, different. Okay.
It's time, I just accidentally stopped it, but that was.
Oh,
Okay. Sorry.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Sorry to cut you off there.
No problem.
Normally Wong is in. And he's more effective.
Welcome back. You can give us an even shorter introduction now.
Okay, absolutely.
I think we remember the last one.
Okay. My name is Kitty Moore. I have a background in land development. I can easily read plans and have a very good grasp of the general plan, the specific plan process, the municipal code, and the California Environmental Quality Act. And I would love to serve the community on this commission.
All right, I'll go first. On Friday, I had a conversation with a developer who has a project in Cupertino, Irvine Company at Hamptons, and asked why nothing's happening. So they listed about 5 reasons. They're worried about the economy, they're worried about losing the money from the existing units while the new ones are being built. But they also concentrated on, they said the impact and mitigation fees are too high, and they have 10 years to do this development. But meanwhile, the city, even though we met our RETA requirement, almost nothing is being built. How does the Planning Commission have a way to approve developments that will actually be constructed, so we do get the housing that we're promising to the state?
Do they have a 10-year
Correct.
limit on that? Okay,
Yes.
so one thing is to consider limiting that time limit that they've got there, because we're getting kind of hammered by RENA when we don't meet the housing requirements, and we saw that with the housing laws with SB 35. I'm a little surprised at some of their reasons. That's a pretty wealthy company, so I hope you challenged him on those reasons. And it's a real problem because we're looking at 600 units that aren't getting built in right next to Apple Park.
She said they really wanted 750.
Well, that would happen if you move to scenario B, so they would have to do something to have that.
All right, thank you. Leon?
Hi. So, we need more and more objective standards so that it's clear what our code asks for, so that developer can take advantage of ambiguities in our code. So what kind of standards or any policies in the general plan you think we could improve on?
Okay, some of the language in the general plan is not definitive. So you have shoulds, for instance, with parkland, it's you should provide it in areas that are park deficient, as opposed to having mitigation fees given, and you should deliver the parkland, but it's not definitive. So you would go through different instances like that, where you've got a should, where you really want a shall, and if you're going to change it to a shall, you've got to define, you don't want to make it too strict of a requirement. And then you've got some issues between, just even today, looking at your heart of the city special area, I've got two maps here which seem to have conflicting boundaries. I've got a South Falco Park Gateway boundary, and it's showing up here as heart of the city special area, so there's some inconsistencies that need to be wrapped up. And then you've got some issues now because you've got kind of layers of maps with different ordinance dates on them, so you've got some inconsistencies. When we go to pull up plans, we're seeing one version of a map and another version of a map. They're supposed to be the same ones, they've got different dates on them. So I would start with the language and inconsistencies within the plan, and flag these things and work on them.
Yeah. So, where and what type of growth do you think should be encouraged in Cupertino, and where should growth be discouraged?
Okay. That one. Pretty much I believe in dispersal. So I prefer something along the lines of scenario B, and I would be discouraging growth. Let's see if I can find my answers now. Okay. I need a very short one like this. Okay. We need to encourage rational and orderly growth and revisit our general plan to ensure resident approval of our long-term vision. And that's really interesting. I went and looked at the vision statement that we have for Cupertino, and it's actually really good. And of course, I'm going to have trouble finding it. There we are. Cupertino aspires to be a balanced community with quiet and attractive residential neighborhoods, exemplary parks and schools, accessible open space areas, hillsides and creeks, and a vibrant, mixed-use heart of a city. Cupertino will be safe, friendly, healthy, connected, walkable, bikeable, and inclusive for all residents and workers, with ample places and opportunities for people to interact, recreate, innovate, and collaborate. I think that it was really well crafted. We need growth which supports our tax bases, provides housing for all income levels, and provides parklands. And we need to discourage project approvals which look like spot zoning, and discourage office when we have a shortage of housing and no transportation infrastructure to support it.
Great. Okay. Mr. Willie.
So I think a lot of people are very concerned about traffic. The projects that get proposed, how can you somehow address those impacts of traffic? I mean, we know that Stevens Creek, Deanza Boulevard, all around Apple. You being on the Planning Commission, how can you maybe help bring that to the surface and hopefully address it? What ideas do you have for that?
In the general plan, it goes back to the language in the general plan. You have requirements for level of service that went from shall to encourage. So instead of having level of service D shall be maintained, we now encourage that. So again, you need to look at the language that you have, what your requirements are, because if you make it, anything goes, you can see that's what we're getting. So there's no restrictions on that. With regards to Apple Park, we had an EIR and the city approved all of those levels of service declines. So that was city council action.
All right, thank you. We're out of time. So Darcy will go first. Good place for you to drop that. Okay, welcome again. Why don't you give us a 30-second introduction and then we'll start with questions.
My name is Xiangchen Xu. I'm a Cupertino resident for 8 years. And when I moved here 8 years ago, I remember at that time I saw some proposals, some image about Main Street. Main Street is close to my home, so I really hope to see a beautiful place. But after it's built, I think it's different from what we saw before. I was very confused at that time. From that time I started to pay attention maybe to some related information. And from 2014, we got more information on WeChat about some city development issue, and I just pay attention to that from that in the last several years. So that's just
Okay, Darcy.
With regard to getting some of that information on social media, do you think that there are ways that the city can be improving residential input into how people feel about particular development proposals? And if so, what would you suggest in terms of those types of outreach mechanisms?
I think from 2 years ago or last year, our city started to post some information on Nextdoor. I think that's a good start, but we can still improve that, maybe give people more different ways to submit their feedback. Just like some information meeting, in the past they ask people to not only be there and fill in the comments card, but actually for many Chinese people, they both work and they have school-age kids. It's very hard for them to attend such meeting, and we hope if there's some, they can submit their opinion through email or maybe some other ways that can really help. And in the past, I think for some Asian people, like Indian, Chinese, they didn't know they can send email to council. They can find some way to voice out. I think they really need to educate them so they know there is some way to let the council, let the commission knows, heard their voice.
Okay. Oh, okay. Accessory dwelling units, they're expensive to build. There's been some proposals that we maybe waive some of the fees to make it less expensive for the homeowner. But how would you get the ADUs to be rented out as long-term rentals instead of like on Airbnb?
Oh, so I didn't understand the first part of the question. If you could
Oh, so ADUs, like a unit, in-law unit behind your
yes,
house.
yeah.
You know, how could, some people say we should lower the impact fees so that they're cheaper to build.
Oh.
I mean, so how would you feel about doing that? But then they would have to charge lower rent for a certain number of years in exchange for getting the city to essentially pay those fees instead of them.
So actually, I think currently Cupertino's policy is, I think it's balanced. It's not so I didn't think about this. Okay. Prepare.
Okay,
Um,
I can ask something different then.
I think we cannot force force people to rent out their unit by lowering some, but there may be some other ways to cooperate. But
Okay, good enough, thank you, Leon.
So it's more important now to provide objective standards so that developers know exactly what to follow. For our current code and any policy in the general plan, do you think we could improve to make some standards objective?
Oh, actually, for the current general plan, the GPA, I'm confused with that part. For some business site, there's no standard of the maximum density and maximum height for building. I'm confused of why our city can pass that in GPA. I think that's 2014. So I do think city should put some guideline for the business owner, for the property owner. They cannot just put a per specific plan in the GPA. And I think we cannot force the developer to build a specific something, but the guideline is still very important. Our city should, they have to insist on some guideline. We can make sure the city has some balanced growth. Yeah.
Great, Ron?
So you talked a little bit about this in the last question, but where and what type of growth should be encouraged in Cupertino? And where would you not, where would you discourage growth?
Actually, I think our current GP, they already increased the building height along Steels Creek, because Steels Creek there's some VDA bus line. I think in the next 10 years, the developer, they can build more mixed use, develop some project there. And I hope the mixed use, they can bring more business at not only the housing units, because people talking about urbanization. I'm not anti-urbanization, but I think living in big city like Beijing and Shanghai, it's very easy to find stores in Cupertino. Actually, you can see more and more stores disappear, but actually more people move in. So we hope the mixed use can be really balanced. I am not opposing the development along in our city, especially along the bus line. But I really think sensible growth is important. And talking about, I oppose the canal project. I think one project with a super giant project in a small place, that should be opposed, because it's very hard to solve the traffic issue and some other infrastructure issue, and maybe cost overflow in schools. So that's the one we should pay attention and be careful.
All right, thank you. We're done. Very good. Thank you for coming.
The next person's yellow window was not in the lobby, so I brought in Sanjiv Kapil.
Okay. Sanjiv. Yes. Okay, why don't you give us about a 30-second introduction, and then we will start to ask questions.
Yeah, I'm living in Cupertino since 2006, and I've been serving in Housing Commission since 2017. And by profession, I'm a technocrat. I've been involved with most of the blue chip companies, including Bell Labs, also some microsystems. Recently, I'm in NVIDIA, and before that I was in Microsoft. So I've seen the technological landscape over the last 25 years.
Great. Who went last?
I did, so.
Okay, so John, you
Yeah.
go.
So, being on the planning commission, you're between projects and the city council. And as I see it, you are tasked with the responsibility to say, gee whiz, is this something that would go forward, and should it still be thought about and changed? What would be the criteria that you would be using to decide whether it's ready or not ready? What's your criteria that you'd be looking at?
My thinking is that that nothing changes overnight. It is a slowly evolving process which needs to line up with the existing thought process. And the city has a vision since 2015 to 2040 vision, and it has outlined 12 goals in there. So whatever the criteria, whatever the new proposals, projects, we look at it, they need to my knowledge, at least strengthen the existing vision which has been laid out for so many years, for next 25 years. And that would be the first most criteria for me to look at it, whether it aligns with that thought or not. And if it aligns with that, then we'll go to the second level of details to see that how feasible it is, how fiscally probable it is, and how the public feedback and community feedback of the city aligns with that particular thought in the project. That is the way I would proceed.
Darcy?
So, as a housing commissioner for the last couple of years, what would you bring over from your experiences there into the planning commission? You mentioned in your last answer about public feedback. Maybe you could describe a little bit about how you went about obtaining that on housing commission and where it might be improved. I'd also be interested in knowing about commission staff interactions and communications with council, if you have any insights in those regards as well.
So housing commission, I would like to put positives first, and there are a few things which we can improve there. The positive is that that we had a open discussion about because we were talking about affordable housing there mostly, and we had a lot of feedback from the community outreach programs in those commissions. Like ADU was to me a brilliant idea. Nothing to take away from it. I mean, it was simply brilliant because it was not creating any contention among the community. It was basically adding to a older population a source of income if they want one. And at the same time, it's solving to a certain extent a affordability problem what the city is facing. There is on the flip side, we discussed a lot about the land being not available in the city, and to acquire the land at affordable prices is very difficult task with a given budget. So there are few out of the box thoughts are there, and probably that is the way we have to go, because in such situations, when you do not have a way to expand in a straightforward laid out rule book way, then basically you have to think about that how we can leverage some other ideas. One of the ideas I think I talked about there was taking care of the commercial properties like Target or Home Depot parking lots and just making them redevelop into some kind of a multi-storied San Francisco style structure, so that we can leverage a lot of land out there which is occupied by such huge parking lots and use it for maybe for affordable housing. Similar, there are a few other ideas which we talked about, but I think my thinking is that this initiative cannot come from Housing Commission by its own. It's basically has to be hand to hand with Planning Commission, because they are the guiding principle who laid out the plans how to move forward in these directions. So, but other than that, I think that the feedback from the regional cooperation between the RIA, what do you call it, that is a good idea, but I'm not sure that how does it basically alleviate the problem. It solves some problem, it creates some other problems for the commute and all those things for the people who are low income and they have to live far off. So those are the issues.
All right, so we have, in our scenario A, we have 1,408 units entitled, and out of those 1,408, 19 units are under construction. The others, Hamptons, Marina, the Oaks, Valco, the entitlements were taken but not used. How do we get, and a lot of affordable housing in there too, how do we get the housing built and not just entitle it?
How do we get housing built and not entitle it?
Not just entitle it. We already entitled it. We actually want it to be built though.
So the entitlement is a two-way street, basically. It's not one-way street. So I think we have to take into account that whenever you're building in a house, there has to be some kind of a incentive on the side of a developer too, that where he will be able to put forward those units for the use. So keeping that thought in mind, if we are going to provide a entitlement, like for instance, we were in Housing Commission, there is a community here who provides 12 houses out of the whole complex for very, very affordable prices. But the remaining houses are at a market price. So the ratio of benefit and the entitlement has to be measured in a very practical way.
Okay, yeah, we're out of time, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
On here, it states that housing is his second choice. But if you go to housing, it states that planning is his second choice. I want to clarify.
Here's Gary Wong.
Jerry, why don't you give a 30-second brief introduction, and then we will start our questions.
Sure. I am a 21-year resident of the city of Cupertino. My wife teaches at Collins Elementary School. My son Brandon has attended Garden Days, Miller, and Cupertino High School. I serve as a block leader for 14 years. I have over 20 years of experience in land use and real estate. I was formerly president of Westlake Development Group in San Mateo, California. I had a portfolio of 1,000 senior living units, 3,000 multifamily units, 3 million square feet of retail and commercial properties. We developed one of the few workforce housing projects in San Mateo. It's at 2,000 Delaware, 60 units. We developed and are developing a 500,000 square foot tech campus in San Leandro, next to the Davis Street BART station. We entitled an obsolete neighborhood shopping center to an elementary school. I'm currently working at Black Mountain Properties in San Carlos, where we're converting 50,000 square foot industrial warehouse to 210,000 square foot life science building. We also control a block right across the Lakewood City train station and we plan to convert that to mixed use. In 2007, we looked at whether to buy Valco Shopping Center or not. And I've served 15 years as an advisory board member to the Fisher Center, which is the Fisher Center for Real Estate and Urban Economics, and also a member of SPUR.
So John, you can go first.
So, the city needs more objective standards so that developers know what to follow and we don't get charged when they are paid. What places do you think we can have better standards in municipal code or policies in the general plan?
I've wondered about that. I think the general plan is the Bible in which most developers start to look at. It comes to areas where there are variances, and I think it's important for the city to give direction in terms of what they're willing to accept or not accept. That's why you have a pre-application, so you have these discussions. Yeah, I've been on the other side of the table, and so sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good, sometimes it's not clear. And I'm not convinced that in Cupertino it's clear because so many projects keep getting rejected. And I don't understand why people have to keep coming back 2 or 3 times for the same project.
Do you see other cities have better or more objective standards?
I don't know if it's objective standards or not. Like when we went to San Leandro, they hadn't had any new developments for 20 years. And so they were pioneering new ground, and so we did a lot of work with them. You have cities like Redwood City, who's going through a big cycle of development, and so they're very clear. You know, well, we don't want any more housing, or we want this, or we want that, or we want retail on the perimeter. So it varies by city.
Great. Where and what type of growth do you think should be encouraged in the city, and where would you discourage growth? Or what kinds of growth?
I don't know if you can control growth, because a lot of the growth that we've experienced over the last 6 years has become unprecedented progress. And so when you say, how do you control growth? Are you going to put a cap on population size? Are you going to, it's hard.
We have a cap on office space, we have a cap on hotel rooms. So
I understand
we
that.
have zoning, right? So
Right.
we do have tools, and we can either encourage or discourage. You have any thoughts about where we ought to do, where we ought to grow, where we ought not, what kinds?
I do think that the city needs more housing. I think, and housing at all levels. So I think that's where the greatest need is for the city at this point. I think it does need retail. I think 90% of our retail is dark because of Valco.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the community needs a place where they can go for goods and services that's convenient for them.
Thank you.
Okay, John?
So, on the planning commission, you're the person between the projects and the city council.
Correct.
What's the criteria that you're gonna think is appropriate? The project comes, what criteria means, well, it's not right versus what's right, and it would come to the city council? What's right?
I see the commission as an advisory group, and we try to filter out those questions or come up with recommendations for the city so that the council can make an informed decision. You know, a lot of times it's not just planning but execution. And a lot of these plans are proposed and then they're executed.
So what are your recommendations? You know, what types of recommendations would you say, oh, this is good, we recommend, oops, this is not good, we don't recommend?
I think part of it is understanding financial feasibility. You know, part of Valco, you know, high-rise development is one of the most expensive to build. And if you're doing affordable housing, it makes it really challenging. So, you know, I'm not sure if the city got in or delved into those types of issues, but it might have helped with the conversation.
Do you have a policy preference between owner-occupied and rental housing? I've had conversations with our planning department over the last several years with regard to the idea that in certain areas we would prefer rental housing because say in 30 or 40 years, it would be easier to redevelop a unified ownership of property. On the other hand, there are the benefits of owner-occupied housing units, and the idea that we're empowering a staffer to essentially play a game of SimCity with our city 30 or 40 years down the line, just from a personal perspective, is not necessarily reflective of a policy choice, but in terms of your own perspective on that, if you have one.
Well, our federal tax policy has encouraged home ownership, and people feel that people who own their home treat their home better. But by the same token, I think more than 50% of the population now rent, and it seems to be growing. And so I think what we think of housing is very different than how millennials may think about housing today.
All right.
All right, thank you. We're out of time.
New perspective on. He was gonna buy Valco in 27.
I know, I was gonna ask that if I got a chance.
I wouldn't have thought, yeah.
How about now?
2007.
Yeah. Hey,
When it was in bankruptcy.
Yeah, should have done it.
Yep. Maybe they will now.
Well, you have the challenge of 4 owners.
This is Swapna.
Have a seat. Can you give us a 30-second introduction, and then we'll ask questions?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Swapna Kelkar, and I have recently moved to Cupertino after a brief stint in Texas and Switzerland and Tokyo and India. And we love this place, and I hope to make it a permanent resident for us. And I've been in the IT industry. My latest portfolio being I was the competency lead for a cloud solution for the Asia Pacific region.
Great, thank you for keeping that brief. So on Planning Commission, we have a lot of housing options that are being looked into. What is your feeling on accessory dwelling units? Kind of called in-law units or cottages in the backyard that are rented out. But they can be rented as long-term rentals, short-term rentals. They've got pros and cons in terms of their impact on the community.
Right.
So what is your opinion on those?
Looking at the general plan, and like when I was going through the plan and regarding the element concerning the housing, I mean, when we take the ratio of the affordability rather, so the number of affordability of houses as compared to the incomes of individuals, I would suggest that, I mean, what you said, renting of, sorry, I forgot.
Accessory dwelling unit, ADU.
Accessory,
Yeah.
yes, so I think that could improve the condition, the affordability condition, and people, because we need all kind of people to live in the city. We cannot expect like people to travel from for 2 hours and come here and work. So I think that renting out the accessory units is a good idea, but of course it may come with cons, and but I feel that there are more pros than cons, and we can actually use the space which is available.
Okay, thank you. Leon?
So we specify what kind of development we want in our municipal code and policies in the general plan. And developers need to know exactly what to follow. So what kind of code or policy you think we can improve on so that it's more clear so that's objective.
sorry, I would not be able to answer that question because I think it is, if you're asking me what kind, I think that's too technical.
So I guess if you have looked at general plan, what do you think we can improve on from what you have read?
From the general plan, so basically, I feel that any planning is always associated, like should be more associated with a sustainable development. And so when I was looking at the communication element, so I would suggest that there are sections which talk about improved bicycle access and pedestrian access and all that. But what I felt which was missing and which we could improve upon was the commute, like within Cupertino, because I feel that some areas like Palo Alto, and they also have something which the residents can use to commute internally, and that can help reduce the number of the traffic. Also, for that matter, we can encourage the school children to take more buses. I mean, it's again an ecosystem which we are talking about. So we can encourage the school children to take buses. So again, the traffic on the road at the peak time can be reduced considerably.
Okay.
Yeah. Where and what type of growth do you think needs to be encouraged in Cupertino, and where would you discourage growth, or what kinds of growth?
Discourage. Let's talk about encourage, the growth which needs to be encouraged.
Yeah.
Basically, again, as I said, that I feel that sustainability is something which we should really stick to, and I feel that something in that area to reduce the carbon footprint and to overall link the planning process very highly to build a sustainable model, a sustainable city towards the vision. I think that's the most important part.
Okay, but if the main kinds of things we could build are housing, office, retail, say, do you think we need more of any of those things, and where would you put it in the city?
I think it's housing. Retail, we do have options, and as per the new plans, so the special plans, I think, which have already been approved for the Valco and the one for the Oaks Center.
Right.
So for them, they do have a mix of everything. So I think projects like these could highly beneficial in the longer run. So, and apart from that, so housing, of course, housing we do need, because the rates of property and the rental rates are going too high. So maybe when we put additional accommodation units, I think that could help stabilize the rates and improve the quality of life for the overall people.
Thank you.
Great.
So, the Planning Commission,
No, that's all right. That's the time, but you already started, so you can finish your
so
question.
the Planning Commission needs to be between us and the projects. And so the Planning Commission needs to be looking at the project. What would you see as being your criteria that you would use to decide this probably isn't right, this one probably is right? Because then the ones that you say are right are going to come to us. What kind of criteria, what do you consider to be the important factors for you?
That, I think, would be dependent on the issues which we are discussing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I cannot take a stand right now as to what. There could be. There are two possibilities or there are n number of possibilities for every issue, and I feel. I would like to learn. So because I'm not from this sector, but I'm a good learner. So what I expect, I cannot totally judge my opinion if I'm given a problem, but then I will try to learn and try to learn from everyone and then put forward my views. So I think, if I start with an opinion and after a meeting, it might happen that, if I train my, I put, or my thoughts are aligned in a specific direction, which are different from where I have started. So I think if it is in the interest of the city, I can align with what is in the interest of the
All right,
city.
thank you. We're out of time.
Thank you.
Ian next, is that true?
Yes, that's right.
Ian,
Michael's view.
South Leader. Mike?
My life, baseball, volleyball. Coached.
Oh, okay.
Lobby, so this is
Okay.
Vikram Saxena.
Hi. Vikram, welcome. I
So,
have,
a little bit about myself for you guys.
oh, great.
So,
Great, appreciate it. Okay, why don't you give us a 30-second introduction?
I'm Vikram. I've been here for 9+ years. I've recently in the school district. I've worked in multiple industries, finance, transportation. I'm an engineer by training. I have a qualitative background. I like to study things deep, ask the right questions. Planning is a multi-objective problem. You need to optimize many different things together. And I believe my analytical and quantitative skills will help me there. Above all, I think planning and everything should take into account what the city needs and what the residents want, and that should be the paramount guiding. It cannot become captive to a certain section of interest. It needs to be comprehensive, it needs to be inclusive, and it needs to be unambiguous. It should not leave loopholes or areas which can be exploited.
Great, thank you. Who is going first next?
So how would you go about gathering community input, especially in an area that deals with land use and a wide variety of opinions throughout the spectrum?
I think community input should span all demographics. It shouldn't be people who have a lot of time. It should also be people with families who don't have a lot of time. We need to provide them a mechanism where they can air their views. It doesn't have to be physical. It could be via electronic means. It should cover all areas of the city. I mean, we are a small city, but we are also a large city. And it should cover the needs of all demographics. Students, young professionals, city workers, teachers, firefighters, policemen, city hall people. And it should be pretty comprehensive and inclusive and allow people to give their input before we plan.
Great. So, yeah, I'm reading here, very, very nicely said. How do we fix this problem of the ambiguity in our general plan regarding standards, height. I mean, a lot of the issues we're facing now are because of the ambiguity.
I think it needs a proper comprehensive review. I, as a new member of the Planning Commission, won't have all the answers, but can lean on the experts who are in the city and maybe neighboring cities. We need to benchmark ourselves against what other cities do, what policies do we have, and especially on mixed use, because I don't think our plan was designed, or our approach was designed to keep into account what is happening now, when mixed use is the prominent thing, and we make sure the guidelines for those are consistent with what the city wants, which allow, which have proper financial vetting. That if we expect the office to subsidize BMR, we need to call it out, so that it shouldn't happen, somebody builds the office and forgets about the BMR. So there are a lot of implicit assumptions which are there in the financial plan and everything. They should be called out, they should be transparent, and they should be unambiguous. So once the plan is done, everybody should be able to go home and not worry about things changing here, things changing there, and with loopholes. Like we know that for tier 2, we have a dependency on the LIHTC credits. Now, from what I have read, we get 107 million of LIHTC credits every year from federal government. That's the whole state of California. But half of them end up with non-profits and some other areas. And we end up with 50 or 60 million split all over the state of California, with each county getting 3 or 4 million. I have no idea how tier 2, 500 homes could be financed with 3 or 4 million of LIHTC credits per year. And to me, that was a very obvious loophole where perhaps the process was not led by people who went deep enough or were cognitively challenged. I have no idea, but when I started looking at it, it was very obvious to me.
Great. And before I love the picture of the backpack, because that's been that
Yes.
when my kids were in school, that was
I
an
mean, I
issue.
was shocked
No
to know
lockers.
that they
is
don't have
not
lockers,
acceptable.
because like I'm a first generation immigrant, and growing up, this locker room in school was my vision of America. You know, like you see locker room stuff and teenagers doing stuff in schools, and to realize that my kids don't have lockers and they have to take this big bag and go from the main building to the portables, which during the rain, to me, it's just not
All right,
right.
let's move on to the next question.
You took my question.
Oh.
So you, in the general plan that you have read and spoke of, what things you think we can improve on?
I think in general, I want lack of ambiguity. Okay. I want all developers to have a clear, precise, unambiguous definition of what can be done and what can't be done. To me, that's the biggest thing. We shouldn't have language which can be misinterpreted. We shouldn't have language which is not consistent. And we should probably get help from people who are experts in this, so that all the 3 tiers, the meeting code, the general plan, and the other master plan, which is not binding, which is supposed to guide, they are in harmony and in consistency with us, so that the subjectivity of the process is gone and it is clear, and all developers who want to come here, they should know exactly what they're getting to, and they can then work without the fear of having to negotiate and go around and having the need to work the system to get things done. That would be my opinion.
Ron?
Yeah, what kind of growth would you encourage in Cupertino, and where would you put it? Likewise, what kind of growth and where would you discourage new
I think
development?
Cupertino, when I bought a home here, was essentially a suburban town. It's not Manhattan, it's not even Queens, it's not downtown San Francisco. I want to make sure whatever we do preserve that character. Any movement toward more urbanization should be in harmony. Like from what I've heard, when we were discussing a new plan, general plan, we were considering between 1.5 to 2 million or 2.5 million office space to all over Cupertino. And in a quick way, we ended up putting 2 million in one area in Valco, where Cupertino has other areas. We have the Bug area, we have the Valco area, we have the Lawrence area. It should have been spread out, so the impact of traffic and other things can be handled rather than putting everything in one place where you are obviously going to lead to problems. We are not a big city, but we're not a tiny city where everything needs to be in one place.
Great, thank you. We're done.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate you coming. And thank you for preparing this.
Thank you.
So, are we doing the video interview of Pete?
The Pete Heller actually has the.
Oh, okay.
Can you play
All right,
that?
sure, okay. Well, we can't ask questions.
Great.
We couldn't have like conference call with him.
Well, we should have that.
Oh, no notes.
I can turn half of it on.
What is your vision for Cupertino for the next 10 years?
Thank you for asking. I actually have three specific initiatives in mind. The first is I want to enable new non-automobile based transit to come to our city. In particular, I want to be able to move commuters to and from both the Caltrain station as well as the new San Jose BART station. So that'll require planning for transit hubs in Cupertino as well as for passenger facilities to get people in and out of those new transit options. Second, I want to expand the housing stock because in particular we need more below market rate housing to enable teachers and service workers to live locally as well as to enable Apple employees to use non-automobile transit to get to and from their work. So that would enable them to walk or ride a bike or take a scooter to get them off the congested city streets. Finally, the third thing is we definitely are becoming more of a senior-oriented community. So I want to have more senior-friendly facilities like walkable, retail, and dining and entertainment options to make our city more conducive for senior lifestyle.
Where and what type of growth should be encouraged or discouraged?
Okay, growth to be encouraged is, as I mentioned earlier, housing stock, particularly near Apple, as well as new below market rate housing. Okay, so housing stock is one. In addition, I want to enable more retail, dining, and entertainment options. Thirdly, more small office space, particularly suited for medical and for senior care. And finally, more hotel space to service our primary employer in town, Apple. Growth to be discouraged would be large-scale, purely office-centric new employer. Trying to say business-centric and pure employee-based offices would. I didn't do that very well. But the point is, I would encourage like smaller offices and discourage the large, very mega-scale office space.
What portions of the general plan do you strongly support?
Very definitely housing, retail, and small office, particularly near the Oaks and in the Valco area make excellent sense.
What are your views on affordable housing? Where should it be and what sacrifices should be made?
Okay, so more affordable housing is definitely a necessity. That's needed to retain our good teachers as well as service workers like police and firemen, fire people. It should be integrated in with other housing developments in order to better promote a community feel. Location-wise, the best places are, as I mentioned earlier, the Oaks and Valco. Those are big open spaces that will be particularly suited for housing, as well as they make sense because we can put transit hubs in there to get those people in and out of their housing and to work without tying up our congested city streets. To pay for affordable housing, I would consider trading off small offices, but mitigating this by orienting that office towards medical and senior-oriented support, and as well as by limiting the parking available in your office space to keep people off the streets, out of auto transit.
How do you view the role of the Planning Commission? If the council sets a policy that you do not agree with, would you support it?
Okay, let me answer this way. it's the council's responsibility to set the overall direction and establish the general plan for the city and create that policy, clarity of policy for the city. The Planning Commission's role is to analyze options that come in and compare them vis-a-vis the general plan and make policy recommendations to the council. So in my mind, as long as the council provides a clear and unambiguous general plan, it's very clear and it would have, my personal feelings would have no bearing on carrying that general plan out.
Okay. Number 8 is lengthy. We agree that I don't need to ask that. Okay. What about number 8?
Okay. So let me answer this way. During my term as a bicycle and pedestrian commissioner, I've established myself as an effective commissioner by taking the approach of coming to the commission with a proposal in mind or in hand, and then working with the other commissioners to reach consensus. If it became clear that consensus was unable to be reached, then I had the flexibility to take a different tack. And I would take the exact same approach in my workings on the Planning Commission.
Okay, number 10. Describe your plan reading skills.
I'm facile at reading, interpreting, as well as writing plans. So, for example, during my when I was the chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission back in 2016, that was the time at which we wrote and developed a comprehensive 2016 bicycle plan, which was subsequently adopted by the City Council.
Okay, last one. If you could accomplish one thing next year on this commission, what would it be?
Definitely, I want to establish a general plan that lays out clearly where the growth is to take place, at what rate of take-up new development would be provided for, and by establishing height limits and establishing a direction for non-auto transit options and building the plan to accommodate new ways of getting people to and from their work and to their schools and around our town. That's.
And Zhao.
Yep.
Sorry.
Give us a short introduction, and then we will ask questions for the rest of the time.
Good evening, Council. My name is Zhao. Thanks for taking the time to listen to me. I grew up in Cupertino for most of my life, and I'm passionate about making cities more sustainable and equitable, and I'm dedicated to bettering Cupertino in this way. I have a lot of experience with city planning. 2 summers ago, I was an intern at Metropolitan Transportation Commission, MTC. So I do have a strong understanding of regional planning and its politics, and I'm familiar with the CASA Compact and can offer expertise in navigating this, the potential changes that are upcoming. And this past summer, I was interning at SFMTA, San Francisco's Municipal Transportation Agency, and I have developed a nuanced understanding of multimodal transportation, and transportation is an ongoing problem here, so I'm happy to offer my knowledge for developing innovative and equitable solutions. I've also engaged with city planning as an advocate. When I was at Stanford, Stanford was updating its development plans, and I worked with other students to pressure Stanford for better housing and transportation benefits for our community. When it comes to developments or plans, I know how to analyze them and identify when they shortchange the community. And I will do my best to ensure that any developments in our community will provide the best feasible benefits. Thank you.
Great. Who is next? Is that John?
So being on the Planning Commission, you're the vehicle between us and the project. what's the criteria that you would be using to determine whether a project seems good for Cupertino or doesn't seem good for Cupertino? So the criteria plus your kind of your measure, your grade, good versus bad for our communities.
Sure. So I think whenever we assess a project, to begin, I think we need to start with objective criteria. What are the like quantifiable metrics that we can use to assess a project? So whether that's like looking at what the potential environmental impacts are, for example. So looking at the EIR, looking at whether there's any impacts that need to be mitigated and how the project applicant is going to propose to address those impacts. Additionally, I think that I think that it's important to try to balance between so I think an example would be sorry, could you just repeat?
So Cupertino, as you know it, I mean, this is your community, this is everybody's community. You're evaluating a particular project and you need to look at criteria.
Yeah.
And which criteria are you going to be concerned about for our community? And what would kind of pass versus not pass?
Yeah, so I think that, as I mentioned before, I think it needs to be based primarily in anything that's quantifiable rather than resorting to just like opinion. At the same time, I think that also means if there are gaps in our objective standards, then we need to be proactive in saying like, updating that. So I know that there are like with SB 35, for example, it created a way for ministerial process to bypass local control. So I think that in cases like that, we need to make sure that if there are any criteria that we want to have actually codified, we need to make sure that's actually clear.
Okay, Darcy.
It's interesting. So lately, I've considered the idea of local control and the rather blunt stick that we're being confronted with, when on the other hand, you would think that if our lawmakers were trained properly, they would realize that local control is really a matter of understanding that the people that are on the ground know their jurisdictions the best. From a planning commission perspective, how would you help to reconcile and bridge that gap, knowing that there are also a lot of monetary motivations, if you will, in the careers of aspiring politicians? So how would you balance those set of considerations from the planning commissioner's perspective?
Monetary motivations.
Well, politicians want to rise. They see big deep pockets, and they basically throw things under the bus, such as the idea that local control is best manifested by the fact that the people that know their jurisdictions the best are the locally elected officials. So how do you help to remedy that kind of situation?
So I think that what's happened currently is because regional lawmakers, or whether it's MTC or state legislature, I think they see a dire problem and they're resorting to much I guess they're skipping a lot of steps in between, where I think that there are certain regional impacts that we can try to address in a more incremental way. So one thing that I'm interested in, for example, is with impact fees, they're all set generally right now by jurisdiction, right? So it's kind of currently a race to the bottom, where in order to try to balance between setting a high enough impact fee that we can actually try to address some of those impacts. If we set it too high, then it's going to incentivize companies or development to go somewhere else, right? So I think that maybe there's some collaboration that can be done more at the regional level that's initiated by local jurisdictions, rather than waiting on the regional bodies such as MTC too.
All right, so you mentioned CASA, and two of the parts of CASA, they want to take 20% of the property tax revenue of new development, and you mentioned mitigation fees, they want to cap mitigation fees. So if that happens, Cupertino, we'd survive. A lot of cities probably would go into bankruptcy, but what would you cut in Cupertino to, because we'd have to backfill all this lost revenue somehow, so what would we give up in Cupertino if CASA passes in order to remain financially viable?
Sure. So one.
That's fine. You can answer the question.
Yeah, I think that before we, I mean, unfortunately, if we do have to resort to having to cut some, some of the budget, then I think that one approach could be to try to ask the community, see if there's a way to do some kind of participatory budgeting. So, creating a forum where you get the input from the citizens, or the residents, I mean, and see where they think the priorities should lie. And additionally, I think that we should try to be proactive and see what are ways to increase our revenue. So if there are certain sources of funding that can try to make up for this lost revenue.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're out of time. Thanks, Joe. So next, I guess, Andrew? Yeah. Unless Ian is showing up.
What about 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, now we're ahead. We can go on.
Caught up.
Now it's going to Chen.
Andrew?
No.
Hi.
Give us a 30-second introduction,
30-second
and
intro,
then
okay.
we'll ask questions.
All right, I've been a resident since '92. I'm worked at Apple for the last 11 years, and I've done a bunch of different things from working in procurement to finance and now systems design. So I think about complex systems at Apple, and dearly love the city and background in engineering and a little bit of medicine, but didn't actually go into the field. Yeah, nice to meet you all.
Great. All right. Moving on, I think you're next.
Being live stream.
Hi. So it's important that the city set good standard in our municipal code and general plan so that developers know what to follow. There is no ambiguity. So from what you have looked at our general plan and municipal code, where do you think that we could improve upon?
Oh, so the question is, from the general plan, what I've looked at, where could you guys improve? I think a more active role in mental health and just health outreach. There's tons of different city centers and residential areas, but how, with the aging demographics we have and the transit population, but immigrant, migrant population, how do we serve the needs of people who are going through retirement, through relocation, temporary. So like being an Apple, there's a lot of people who are new to the area, so they're not aware of resources, and so I think that's probably the biggest thing. And how do you create satellites within the different city centers, or the many city centers we have, to kind of make that going on?
So let's talk about growth a bit. Where would you plan new growth in the city? What type of growth should be encouraged, and where do you think, or what kinds of growth would you be less encouraging of?
So where would we like to have more growth in the city?
Where and what kind? Yeah.
Where and what kind? All right. When the city plan points out there's lots of different open areas for different types of development, commercial and residential. So I think those are the natural places to start. But I know with the Valco thing, it's kind of interesting with the
that's a big area that's already kind of underway. But other than that, where and what kind? The where is just the things already outlined in the plan. What kind, just whatever we would need to have people who actually want to plan to build something there. So work with whatever developers that have projects in the pipeline. So.
Thank you. Okay, John?
So you're on the planning commission. You have projects to evaluate. You could approve everything, but probably you're going to want to use some criteria to decide which ones are good for our community and which ones maybe aren't. What's the criteria that you would be using as you decide which ones would and wouldn't be good for the community, things of that nature?
I mean, again, the general plan has a lot of guidelines and literature regarding this topic. So, like, is it cohesive? Does it promote community well-being? Does it help with education? I mean, so it's kind of a non-answer answer, but those are the guidelines I would use: diversity, mobility, those type of things. So.
How about density? How about
that's
composition?
Gradual, and I've been here a long time now, going on 25 years. So I've seen. I mean, it's hard to summarize into a sentence, but basically gradual and with the community's support.
Carson?
Do you have a preference between the building owner-occupied as opposed to rental housing, and if so,
I have a personal preference, sure, which is owner-occupied, but I mean, there is lots of rental. My girlfriend just is trying to move to the city and she's trying to rent, so I understand that's already part of the mix that we have. But yeah, I grew up here, so I know the joy of having a community be people who are from the community and kind of stay in the community. But of course, I live by Shadow Oaks too, and that's been a heavy renter area. So I mean, there's a place for both.
So how do you feel about the proposal for accessory dwelling units, and should we allow them to be used as short-term rentals or only as long-term rentals?
So this is in-law units, accessory.
Yeah, in-law units essentially.
And this is a personal opinion, or this is what?
Well, I mean, what do you think would be
commission?
best for the city, should they?
Yeah, no, I know there's a lot of people trying to build out their homes. I mean, it's a update on the girlfriend. She's actually moving into a dwelling unit, or accessory unit. So it's kind of interesting. So it's kind of a funny thing. Yeah, I'm for it as long as it's within reason, and I know that this is a huge change to the city. But again, it's like balance and not can be responsive to changing trends.
So what do you mean by within reason?
Within reason is, well, I mean, that's what the city and people say, right? It's within reason is currently we have a guideline, and then meet those guidelines. Those guidelines need to be revisited, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, currently we are formulating the guidelines for EDUs. There's a lot of controversy.
Sure.
Is someone going to build it and rent it out at $200 a night as an ADU,
right,
or $3,000 a month as a long-term rental? There's a big financial difference there, especially with the cost of hotel rooms in the city.
Yeah. So I mean, I understand the benefit to families. I mean, there's already a ton of like empty nests too, so that's also already an issue. So I'm willing to look into the issue and learn about it.
All right, thank you. So we're out of time.
Thank you. Good evening. Lovely to meet you all. Thank you for your hard work for the city.
Right, this is mine.
Oh, you want to sign
Gopa's back.
Welcome back.
I'm back, thank you.
So now you can give us an even shorter introduction.
Absolutely. So I'm here again on the second one I applied because there is a commonality of my experience in connecting with the community. This is another area of opportunity where I thought I should be able to serve at the will of the community. And my corporate experience, especially in planning the big budget items, how do I look into it? I can put the same lens. So that's the reason I'm here for.
All right.
So from your reading of our municipal code and general plan, where do you think we can improve upon so that we can provide some more clarity to developers so they know exactly how to follow? And anything else that you think we can?
Absolutely. So when I look at the general plan, while I'm not an expert in completely on all the codes and stuff, but I think I put it as if I have if I have a functional spec to develop something in my software area, I go through all of those specifications and read through it. Wherever there is an ambiguity, then you need to substantiate with the use cases, the case study. That's how it will help. Otherwise, I can simply say develop something to support some feature, the range which. It's the same thing when I apply to the general plan. When you read the general plan, some areas are really kind of a vague, in the sense generically for your interpretation, your perception, whatever the way, the lens you look into it, you can interpret that way. Those areas I would like to have it, if there is a case, it should be substantiated with the case studies or the samples, proofs, prototypes, kind of an example, how that is being perceived when it is written. That's how I look at it. So those are the ambiguities I would like to really address it. There are the different areas it has an ambiguity. While the vision is great, I love the vision of having a friendly development and all of the vision looks great. When it comes to mission and then how do I execute, I see a lot of ambiguity. Personally, for me, I'm not saying it's for globally.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on. Okay,
Yeah.
Ron.
So if we think about growth in the city, where do you think we ought to be encouraging more growth and of what type? Where would you discourage growth? And what types?
Yeah, so based on my experience so far here, at least 18 years, the areas where I would like to discourage, let me start with that, is that where it comes with too many dependencies. For example, if I come up with an office space here, it's great, but it has too many dependencies on traffic and floating population, all of them, which is only benefits only one portion of it. So without doing much of the dependency, I would like to go the other ones where the basic needs for affordable housing and especially for low income, very low income, wherever it is possible. Those are the grassroots and it comes from the bottom up. This is where I do the bottom up approach, not the top down approach. Where I will encourage is the bottom up approach of developments. That's why I really encourage it. The discourages are anything comes in commercial, especially in office spaces, which I've seen it. That's personally I don't encourage those kind of things. Anything for people
So
development challenged.
What do you mean by bottoms up versus?
So when you do a bottom, yeah. So I think in many of the development areas, you do a bottom-up approach, which is a crowdsourcing type of projects. When you do a top-down, it comes from a CEO, from the companies I work on. They say, this is what it is, go and do it. When you go and the risk and mitigations, you have to find out the mitigations to satisfy that needs. Rather, if it's go to the bottom up, when I say, I just put my vision and the mission statement and say what a problem I want to solve, and then comes with the experts within mine, and they come up from the bottom up and say that this is what we need to do it, these are the plans, and they come up with the plans. So that's why I say bottom up and the top down. Both as
Who is they in this case?
So in this case, again, the commissions, community, working with the community, experts in community. There are tons of experts in this community. I would like to make sure that we take advantage, leverage their experts, and then get those opinions and then bubble up rather than pushing down. That's, again, my stand, my personal opinion based on what I have seen. Those two approaches are there. I would like, given the expansion we do it, I would like to have a bottom-up approach.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
John.
So on the planning commission, you got a lot of projects coming through. I mean, these days, fast and furious. And you need to kind of be between the projects and the city council and determine which ones would be good for the community versus which ones wouldn't be. what's the criteria that you would be using to determine the ones that would be good for the community versus the ones that would be maybe more of a problem for the community? Kind of a example case, you know, what types of criteria would you be looking at to determine good versus not good for our community?
Maybe let me, anything we put in there for the city, and if it is coming from the community request,
okay,
I would strongly support it.
Yep.
I do not know whether good and bad, it's based on the data. We need to have a data-driven analysis, because like we do at work, and it's all to be data, it's not simply about our feelings and stuff, it's data. If it brings income, if it supports it, and if it's, even if the community members can come back and ask something which we feel it's not right, it's not going to, it's our responsibility to explain to them, bring the awareness, and kind of give them, teach them and say this is what it is. This is going to have a negative impact. I know you're asking for the right thing. So that's where I think the Planning Commission plays a huge role in educating based on the data-driven decisions with the community input. I don't want to blindly say that, okay, we are sitting there an expert. No, we use all the data, and that's why we analyze it. That's how I decide. I do not know which is good, bad today. Based on the data, it will decide.
Great.
Darcy?
So we've entitled our entire regional housing needs allocation for this current period. It's approximately 1,000 units of housing, but very few of those units have been built or have started to begun to be built. So there are two things. How would you go out and outreach the community to let it be known that we have in fact met those obligations in good faith for projects that are intended to be built? And how would you go about getting them built or helping to encourage them to get built?
So this is like when I say ask and if I understand the question, I think it's predominantly the people who are building, right? So this is
Sure. There's a PR component to it.
Yeah.
There's a what can you do or suggest on a policy level to try to spur on that.
Agree. I think this is where I feel that this, again, especially on the Planning Commission, given that this plays a huge role, not just as a facilitator, but as a voice of the city council, as well as voice of the commission, voice of the community. So when then any developer or anyone comes in and says that this is what we need to, right? And then I would always encourage and have these gatherings, which I typically do with the other areas, to bring in those developers or the community members where it's needed, to bring in and explain the situation and where it is. So I do not know the exact specific answer to it on how do I do it on each one of them, but it's our own interest to bring in both of them on the same table and explain the situation.
Right.
I don't see.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Wang. Oh, now. 3 more. Wang, and then we're putting in Allen and Paula.
Let's see. Are we still about 15 minutes early?
Let's see, it's 8:10, right, and she's got, our Wang's scheduled at 8:20.
I'm running early, and
Right.
our Wang is not out there, so I brought in Alan Young.
Great,
And I'm
okay.
gonna start calling people.
Well, by the time we're done, you may
Okay,
be-
here we go.
Hi, so can you give us like a 30-second introduction and then we'll
Sure,
start asking
sure.
questions?
So my name is Alan Young. I'm a software engineer working at Amazon Avenue 26 in San Diego. And I've been working in technology since I graduated from UC Berkeley. I have a strong interest in technology. But what I'm really interested in when it comes to the planning commission is really serving this part of my community for something that I feel like is really important. Any other questions?
Yeah, oh, we have lots of questions. Are you familiar with the CASA compact at all?
I cannot say that.
Okay. How about accessory dwelling units? Like in-law units?
I know what they are.
So, there's an issue with in-laws. Some people want to build them and rent them out as like Airbnb. As in Cupertino, hotels are extremely expensive, so you can make a lot of money if it's rented out as a short-term rental. And then if it's rented out as a long-term rental, it's providing more affordable housing to people. So what is your position on ADUs and what should we do moving forward? And can we tell people what to do with their property?
Well, I think there's obviously a very important component when it comes to zoning and what kind of dwelling they could actually construct. And that I think determines whether they can have a long-term versus a short-term rental. I think there's ordinances that we have to look at in terms of safety, and we have to look at just how it impacts the community. So my stance on it is one that is very measured. I think we need to have kind of a framework in place to make sure that there is a reasonable expectation for what these developments are and what they can be done to.
Okay, great. Yes.
So from your reading of the municipal code and general plan, where do you think we could improve on so that we can provide better, clear direction to the developers when they develop the project? And anything in the original plan or code you think we can improve on?
So which kind of projects are you referring to in terms of the developers?
Are you familiar with the new project in Cupertino? Maybe you can use something you are familiar with as an example.
So,
and
sure.
thinking about whether we can improve our code or plan policies.
Sure, absolutely. So I think the kind of hot topic recently was the Cupertino Valco project. And so I think with regards to what we can do in terms of the Cupertino code, one thing we can do is just make it very clear about what it is that Cupertino is doing to address at a citywide level housing needs and how solving the housing issue as it relates to kind of a statewide mandate, and also what we're doing in terms of kind of honoring, preserving the character of Cupertino as a city. I think making that very clear is really important so that developers know what exactly they're dealing with, and they can come up with a framework that is going to be aligned with the Cupertino price pretty clearly spelled out.
Specifically, what things in policy or code we can use to specify this is the character of Cupertino?
Yeah, so I think that really comes down to making it very clear what is it that Cupertino as a whole is agreeing upon as the character. So I think that's something that really requires a lot of communication with the community to figure out and agree on. And also I think it comes down to balancing different sides of the issue here. So I think it's not just a zero-sum game where kind of one side over the other. I think it's a combination of things.
Ron?
Thank you. So if we talk about growth here, where and what type of growth would you encourage in the city, and where or what type of growth would you discourage at this time?
So I think there's pockets of development in Cupertino that we could obviously encourage development in, and I think a lot of those mixed-use projects that we see in Cupertino are perfect places for development or for growth. But I think the preservation of Cupertino wildlife, the neighborhoods in Cupertino that we don't want to kind of urbanize, I think we have to respect that as well. So I think there's certain areas that we can develop, but it's not something that we have to expand to kind of Cupertino as a whole.
Got it. Do you want to get any more specific on types of development or specific areas of the city?
So, with regards to the Cupertino Valco project, Main Street, I think all of those are really good examples of mixed-use development.
Great. John?
So, planning commission, we really need the planning commission to do the evaluation of the projects and then pass them to us if they feel it's right. When I do projects at work, I make a list of all the things I need to check before I can say it's done. What's the criteria? What are the points that you'd be going down? You've got projects there to decide whether it's right for our community or not. What are the items that you would be looking at to determine if it's right?
So to determine whether a project should be approved or not?
Well, determine whether or not you think you're recommending it to come to the city council. So you're the first line of defense, or the one that's actually going to be giving us, the good thumbs up type thing. What are the items that you're going to be looking at to determine that?
Okay, yeah, got it. So I think what I would be looking at is really what's the kind of high-level purpose of the development. So what is it that is the problem that we're addressing here? What is the kind of impact as it relates to the scope of the project? I don't know how much of it in terms of costs is going to be known at that point. Is there going to be kind of a detailed breakdown or anything available at that point?
So, cost is up to the developer to worry about that. He's proposed something, and then you're the first line of defense. And so, how much housing versus how much office versus how much retail, how much traffic, how much student generation, all those things you're going to be needing to decide that it would or wouldn't. And so, more or less, if there's anything else besides those that you would feel important, and previously you had said, preserving wildlife, anything that you think is going to be needed or important, and that would be in your recommendations coming to us.
Yeah, so absolutely. You mentioned traffic, that's a huge component. And then with regards to proximity to schools, of course, that's going to affect traffic as well, as well as safety. But also, depending on the project, I think we need to look at what is it going to do in terms of impacting the tax revenue and tax generation. I think there has to be a good balance between tax generation from a property tax standpoint versus from a business standpoint. I think we talked about kind of places where I think development is most appropriate. And that also is something that is going to relate to transportation. I think our transportation infrastructure is something that is going to needs to be looked at if we're going to have a lot of development very focused in a specific area.
Finish up because we're way over time now.
So,
All right, thank you. Over. Thank you for coming.
All right.
thank you very much.
We're waiting for our
Because they don't know where it
Right, because she said 15 minutes early we started. Yeah, he should be here though. We can always get called. And he never showed up.
Okay, our Wang is not out there, and neither is Kala.
Oh, really?
Kala didn't return my call or email.
Is anybody out there?
No,
No,
nobody's
so
out
that's
there.
it?
So should I start calling library?
What about for oh, so library has.
Sorry? She canceled this evening,
Okay.
just after we started.
Yeah, so we can, well,
You didn't reach our way?
Yes, we went back and forth. He confirmed. He
Who?
was he was going to do a video interview, and then he decided he said he shuffled some meetings around, and he said he'd be here. So if you would like to wait for him.
Also, he's coming, but
He said he would be here
When
at
did you
8:22.
call him? Today or what?
I was emailing him this afternoon. Yes.
I'd say he does show up later, see about fitting him in, but as long as there's somebody out there.
Well, there's nobody out there.
There's nobody out there.
Even
Why
for
doesn't
whatever.
start talk for another 40 minutes?
45.
Wow, we are early. Wow.
Well, we had
In the end,
Nine
nothing
no
from, nothing from the end or anything?
Ian, no, he confirmed, but he didn't show up. We need a break.
Other than that.
So yes.
If you're going to grow, we also have to think about what the environmental implications are, what are the traffic implications, what's the impact on schools, what happens from a health and safety perspective. And I think sometimes we haven't had those conversations. They've been in vacuum, right? And so if you can address those in lockstep, where people see a plan in each one of those areas, think of them as potentially different paths that are actually on a Gantt chart, where people actually say, here's where we're headed, and when we hit this milestone, we can then do the next piece. I think people will be much better understanding the holistic piece. So for me, it's like, so long those things actually are balanced, then you can grow, right? It's not a big thing. But if we know that we put like 1,400 units of housing versus 2,700 units of housing, and that means traffic flows are X, Y, and Z, let's go find the money to actually, get VTA to do something, or build, extended roads, or think about how we actually lessen the slowing of traffic so we can actually put more capacity on Stevens Creek or Town.
We're done. And if you can get to VTA to do something about anything, more power to you, man.
We can try. We can try, right? But yeah, I understand. But we're on transit-based corridors.
All right, thank you. We're done.
Okay, bye.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you very much.